Hi, welcome to my review for Shadow of the Conqueror by Shad.M.Brooks from the Chronicles of Everfall. So a little bit of controversy with this book. Why did I read it? Well, I'd seen Shad's YouTube channel, which is called Shadiversity, some of which is good, some of which is, not so great. And so I was aware of him and I'd seen people reviewing his book. It got me curious. Some people really like Shadow of the Conqueror, and some thought it was something that could be like a solution to localized shortages of toilet paper. I looked around at other people's comments. I did mostly notice that guys liked it, and probably less women liked it, I think. Not sure why that is. Anyway, I thought I couldn't really work out why so many people liked it and some didn't. I just thought, look, I'll read it myself just to see what it's like. Also, really good to see. I was interested to see an Australian fantasy author. There's not too many in Australia. Garth Nix, John Flanagan. Anyway, good on him for going out and writing something and getting it out there. So a little bit about the author. As mentioned, Shad.M.Brooks is known for his YouTube channel, Shadiversity. This is his first published book. He's written other stuff, what we call attic books. They haven't been released, but this is the first thing that people know how to access. In real life, he's an engineer, and he also has a serious interest in medieval fantasy and weapons and things like that. And that's a lot of the content of his YouTube channel, and it comes through. Some of it comes through in this book as well. Now, just a note: this is a self-published work. So it hasn't been through the commercial publishing process. He's published it himself. Despite that, it looks like a normal published book, and the artwork's great, and the layout and everything is all fine. So that's not really an issue. It's all looks perfectly professional. So the plot. Firstly, the plot's really interesting in a lot of ways because instead of your typical plot involving a hero finding himself in a predicament and then having to complete the mission to save the world or save themselves. This plot involves an anti-hero wandering around the world, dealing with their guilt. So it's almost like having a regretful Adolf Hitler as a main character. Most of the story is seen through the eyes of the main character, who's called Dalen, who was a tyrannical despot called Dalus the Conqueror, then reborn in a different body. And his life is therefore changed, and he spends the book wandering around, having various encounters. So a lot of the book deals with him discovering his powers, discovering the world, experiencing people's reactions to him. Overall, I didn't find the plot structure very strong. I didn't really find it drove the action along. I'd say the book was probably more character-driven than plot-driven. The pacing is okay, but there really isn't any major challenges to the two main characters. Most of the story is sort of Dalen finding out what really people thought of him as a tyrant, discovering the ramifications of him being a tyrant in the world, and discovering his powers. And then there's a lot of world exposition. That said, it's not too bad, as his character is sort of interesting, and the world building is of note. But overall, the story sort of meanders and then picks up at the end. A lot of the plot is sort of wondering what's going to happen to the character. But that's not really enough to keep interest in the story of itself, and nor should it be. Part of the problem with the plot is the two main characters are seriously overpowered to the point where they're almost like gods. So it sort of means that in encountering them in the plot, there's no real serious threat to them. You can basically do whatever they want. And then a lot of the plot is sort of appears at the end. A lot of the action and revelations are at the very end of the story, which means for a lot of it, there's not so much plot. There's some themes in the story, though, some interesting themes. Probably deals with, I would say, forgiveness, revenge, and regret. And these are all themes that sort of revolve around the main character of Dalen or Dalus the Conqueror. So the characters, Most of the focus of the book deals with two main characters, Dalen and his Lightbringer friend Aaron. So as mentioned, Dalen is an interesting character because previously he was a despot and a cruel tyrant and a genocidal murderer, killed millions of people. He feels guilty about it, and as I said, the book deals with him, coming to grips with what he's done and looking at the effects of what he's done on the world. Aaron is his Lightbringer friend, companion who carries along with him throughout the adventure. He's like a healer, magician, magic user, very high level. He also has two other characters, secondary characters, Lyra and Kueseg, probably not pronouncing that properly. And Lyra, her sort of plot stuff happens more towards the end as well. Dalen's the most interesting out of all of them and probably the most expanded, developed. The writing is really is pretty good. There's some attempts at humour, which are a little bit hit and miss. The dialogue's short and precise. For a first book, I thought it was very well written. But of course, the main problem is the exposition. The book's hampered by huge tracts of technical exposition. As I said, talking about how the world works. Dalen will pick up a device, and then there'll be like 2 paragraphs talking about how the device works with the particular physics of the world. So it's very technical, and Shad.M.Brooks, being an engineer, it's almost like he's writing for other engineers who might be interested in the physics of this world rather than the readers of a fantasy novel. So Brooks has a lot of really interesting ideas, but the level of depth to which he explains them is sort of out of place, and it really does sort of derail the storytelling. And that's evident in the first third or half of the book. Lots of world exposition. Worldbuilding was great. Lots of detail. The world is sort of like a 19th century world with skyships. And the technology they use is sort of based around this thing called darkstone. You shine light in darkstone, and that makes power to propel devices. And it's got its own specific physics, which Brooks talks a lot about. They don't have guns, so most of the action involves people using swords and magic, which works quite well. Now, talking about the good and the bad of the novel, the good, Dallas the character, I really like that concept of a despot, a genocidal maniac as your main character. Well, that was really interesting. The technology was really interesting as well, I thought. So there are 2 good things about it. The bad, I thought the morality was sort of simplistic. There's some simplistic, unrealistic treatments of sexual assault. It's like over-the-top depictions of violence seem to be crazy, almost like something you'd see in anime, rather than a novel. People do really violent things, and there's not really ramifications for it, like you would see in the real world. Overpowered characters, as I spoke of. Some of the characters are like virtual gods, and they can do whatever they want. Scenarios involving the characters dealing with the main characters dealing with, other characters. All the anticipation of watching a cat play with a moth. You know what's going to happen. There's no challenges to them. They're really invincible, and they just don't, they don't face any challenges. They also don't earn the abilities. They're sort of given the abilities, or they already have them. And of course, the biggest problem is the technical exposition. You could almost get the technical exposition, pull it out, and have a technical appendix and put it at the end of the book, rather than have it spread throughout the story. So overall, while it's got some interesting points, I thought it's a little bit flawed. I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 5 stars, but still pretty good for a first work. So that's Shadow the Conqueror, Shad.M.Brooks, my review of it from the Fantasy Review.